Welcome. My name is Niles Parker. I'm the Gosnell Executive Director for the NHA, and it's a true pleasure to welcome you here to Greater Light, one of the NHA's 18 properties, as well as to the island of Nantucket. I know you're in for an exciting week here with some fantastic programs and panels, and we're just thrilled that it's here finally. It's been a long time in coming, and great to welcome you all, as I say, to Greater Light. I just wanted to thank our co-sponsors for this event. William Ravis Real Estate and Woodmeister Master Builders. They've been steady supporters of this event for a while now, and we're very grateful to them for their kindness and generosity. And then it's my great pleasure to turn it over to our co-chairs. Bill and Marla have been just doing incredible work now to make this event happen. This would not happen without them. And so, to both of you, thank you very much for all you've done. And I think it's my job just to hand the mic to Marla.
Yes. This is one of the days I say the least, but I say something really important, which is we really would like to thank our sponsors for this event, which are Arrowhead Nursery, Audrey Stirk Design, Carolyn Thayer Interiors, Emeritus, Dujardin Design, James Robinson Inc., Kristen Patton Interiors, Susan Listerlock Jewelry, and The Vault. So I will, with my great honor, introduce my co-chair, Bill, who has been an incredible partner for the last, I don't know, it feels like a year, 12 months, 8 months, not sure.
We make a good team.
We make a good team.
So it's my pleasure this morning to welcome Stacey Bewkes as our moderator. Most of you in the room probably know Stacey, long relationship with Nantucket, summer resident for years, more recently a permanent resident. Stacey was the co-chair of Nantucket by Design for the prior 2 years. She's also on the board of the NHA, and then she does this little thing you may have heard of called Quintessence. So without further ado, Stacey.
Thank you. I don't think I need the mic for this part. Well, thank you all for coming, and I know I speak for all of us when we say we are thrilled to be kicking off Nantucket by Design in one of my, and I think also one of our favorite NHA properties. If you don't know much about Greater Light, do yourself a favor, look around and read about it on the NHA site. It has an incredibly fascinating history. So I'm so happy to have with me Bess Clarke of Nantucket Looms, Caitlin of Parsons, right? Sorry, I forgot I was introducing everyone. Of Nantucket Bracelets, Michelle Holland of Nantucket House Antiques, and Ray Pohl of the architectural firm Botticelli and Pohl. The rich tapestry of Nantucket's history is in many ways woven through its tradition of craft. And whether it's architecture, furniture, textiles, or decorative arts. And for those who don't know, for example, Nantucket has one of the largest concentrations of pre-Civil War houses in the country. There are over 800. And we also have an incredible and wide variety of decorative arts in the Whaling Museum, which the name does not represent everything that is in the museum. And I want to say I love that you all here are somehow connected to the history of artisanal craftsmanship on Nantucket. And I'm going to let each person tell a little bit about their Nantucket legacy, what they do, and why craftsmanship is so important. And Bess is going to kick it off.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm honored to be on this panel with many talented guests joining me. So I was essentially born into Nantucket Looms. The Nantucket Looms was located at 16 Main Street, and the founders, Bill Euler and Andy Oates, had a dinner one evening at the Woodbox where they were working with Walter and Marianne Beinecke. And towards the end of the night, it was found that both Marianne and Andy had a love of textiles and weaving. And from that, the idea was born to start a production weaving studio at 16 Main Street. It opened under the Historical Trust as part of the cloth company and Nantucket Looms, with the idea of making textiles for some of the historic properties namely the Jared Coffin House. So under that, the Historical Trust, the Looms wove hundreds of yardage, and once those projects were completed in 1968, Nantucket Looms opened as its own business. My mom, Liz Winship, who many of you probably know, joined the business in 1974 with the idea of coming out for one season, and she never left.
Very typical Nantucket story.
So I was born in 1977, and we used to take photos in front of the Looms for the Christmas card, and I'm actually being held here by Jamie Gould, who went on to open Rogers and Goffigan after everything he had learned from Andy as a master weaver, opened his own textile house. So I do not want to take credit for running the Looms these days by myself. My partners, Becky Perner and Stephanie Hall, are a huge part of the business. My mom retired about 10 years ago, and the three of us joined as partners. So Becky still runs the production weaving studio, and Stephanie oversees the interior design, and both of them do the buying for the business. So we are very much a family and a partnership. So I hope you've all come to see the second floor weaving studio because it is open to the public, and that's where we create our blankets, and we still are making yardage. Eileen just came up to me and inquired if we were still doing production yardage, and we are. But that is really the heart of our business, and we're so proud that we can still carry on that tradition. When I joined the business about 11 years ago, I should say I did work for the business throughout high school and in college, and when I moved back to the island, I was at the Athenaeum for 10 years as Director of Development, doing nonprofit fundraising, which is still a passion of mine. And then I rejoined the business 10 years later. And when I joined, I really felt strongly that we were to add a website to the business because I felt if there ever came a time that people weren't able to come to the island, foreshadowing of 2020, they could still purchase products online. And so we've really dedicated a lot of time and effort these past 10 years. I have my two digital marketers in the audience, Claire and Lindsay, who've really helped build that part of the business. And I feel it's a great platform because we can tell the story of craftsmanship through the product descriptions. We write blogs that support what we do. And I think the reason we're all here today is to really educate people why it's important to carry on the storytelling that goes with so many of our products.
Exactly. And before Caitlin starts, I just want to say Bess was a little modest about their history, but in the days when they were weaving fabric, Jackie Kennedy came here, Bunny Mellon came here, all to have fabrics woven at the Looms.
Thank you. All right, I'm up next, I guess. My name's Caitlin Parsons. Let me click to my next slide here. So a lot of my pictures are childhood pictures. Growing up out here, my parents moved out here when I was 3 years old, so I was born in '85. And so a lot of my I'm just tied to Nantucket. Nantucket's part of my identity. It's all I've ever known. So growing up out here, 80s and 90s child, spent a lot of time outdoors and just simple life out here. A lot of time on the water, on the beach. Click through here. Nantucket winters in the 90s. Pretty bleak and gray and cold, but this picture is probably shortly after my father started making baskets. He began in 1989. I was 4 or 5 years old, and he came to Nantucket as a wallpaper guy. He did irrigation, a lot of odd jobs, and And he ended up meeting Alan Reed, and he met John Sylvia, who owns Sylvia Antiques now on Main Street. It was actually John's father who first ran the business. And he was, joking with John. He's like, I'm trying to come up with some unique Christmas gifts this year, what do you think? And he's like, hey, why don't you, I have a few extra molds and some materials, why don't you try your hand at baskets? You were an art major, right? So he brought them home and kind of self-taught and played around on the baskets. And he brought him back about 10 or so. And he's like, what do you think, John? And he's like, great, I'll take 50. And so that's kind of where his basket journey started. And then the following season, when his seasonal job started back up, they were like, all right, so you ready to come back to work, Tim? And he's like, no, I'm making way more, and I get to, sit at home and do my craft now. So that was kind of launched his journey into basket making. So over the next 5 years or so, he was self-taught, so he took some woodworking classes, added that to his repertoire, and went around to different people's shops on the island, a lot of which are either not on Nantucket anymore or have retired since. So, kind of tried to take a little bit from each shop and played around with his techniques and methods himself. I made my first basket when I was about 8, so just I grew up in the wood shop, and I always remember, it's those, visceral kind of memories you have, but I always remember sawdust on my socks as a kid and never being able to get them out, no matter how much you wash or dry them. So that was just part of growing up here was, growing up in a wood shop. I would make change for customers. I would, sweep the floors and that kind of stuff. So again, very much part of my childhood. And then leaving after high school here, I left for about 10 years, went to college, and traveled the world, vowed never to come back. I was like, get me as far away as possible, And then I was working in Boston at the time and met my now husband. And I had a really bad ankle injury, and so I was laid up for a while, and my dad came to visit and check on me and brought me some of the bracelet materials. He had just started making those. Peter Finch was the first weaver out here to create those bracelets. And my dad's customers had brought them to him and said, hey, we want to figure out how to make these too in different shapes, styles, etc. And so he played around with the design and incorporated other traditional basket materials. So he brought me those materials while I was laid up, got back into weaving, moved back here. And, same thing, the rest is history. I planned on a summer out here, and then my husband's like, why did you ever leave this place? And, and then, I was like, I really don't want to stay anymore. And he's like, come on, I'll buy you a puppy. And I'm like, okay, fine. And so that got me to stay the first winter. And then we got older and, talked about raising a family here. And now we got our family here, and it's amazing. It's a great place to raise kids. And business-wise, been part-time with my dad for about 12 years, and I just went full-time with him 4 years ago. So I'm learning all the woodworking, all the scrimshaw, ivory carving, etc. So that's me. I'll pass it on to you, Michelle. Thank you guys for being here.
And before Michelle starts, I just wanted to say several years ago I filmed an episode for the NHA YouTube channel all about basket making, and Caitlin's father, Tim, is in that video if you'd like to see that. It's on the NHA YouTube channel.
Okay, this is not Nantucket. But if I'm going to talk about Nantucket House and the heritage of Nantucket House and really where it started in Detroit. So this is the J.L. Hudson's building, and if you grew up in Detroit or Michigan, it was iconic. My father-in-law's great uncle started this business, J.L. Hudson's, in 1911. Here's a couple factoids: 2 world records, the tallest department store building, and a record 705 fitting rooms, 49 acres of floor space. It was huge. They sponsored the Thanksgiving Day parade, and we'd always hear about, my grandmother would say, you put your white gloves on, you'd go to Hudson's, and you'd have the Marie salad. It was a very special place. I have a picture here of this flag, which is the largest flag in the world. It's in the Smithsonian. It took 55 men and a mile of rope, and they would put it up every 4th of July and special holidays. Hudson's has since become a part of Target, actually, and they replicated this flag in 2003, and it's in Chicago at the Marshall Fields, and they bring it out every once in a while. All the men in the Hudson's family worked for the family business, including my father-in-law, Hudson Holland. And in 1973, my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, Sandy, decided that they wanted a more simple life instead of this. So they just kind of broke with tradition and moved full-time to Nantucket. And my mother-in-law said everybody thought they were crazy. This is my mother-in-law, Sandy, in her living room. It's a shop on 8 Fair Street. She had a loom in the living room, as one does. That was where the original shop was. There's my husband and his brother fishing out on Brant Point. And I love the title of this. This is a House and Garden 1978. And it says, Your Lifestyle, How to Create the One You Really Want. And a lifestyle of crafts, antiques, and nature. And I think that kind of just says it all, about that time. They hired Gary Knight away from Hudson's to come and run the interior design business. He was great friends with Andy. They all were kind of a posse. And I'm very intrigued by that time. It was sort of this bohemian, very artsy place, inexpensive to live here. Kevin Paulson, who I work with a lot, he said it was a great place. It was always lively. You could find cheap rent, lots of artists. They all influenced one another, and you can see that in their work. And actually, this is interesting. I wrote this in my notes. My mother-in-law had this impeccable taste, and she really, I think, helped coin the Nantucket look. And when I started doing this, I did buying trips with her, and I said, I have an engineering degree. Like, this is not, I was not trained. And she said, it doesn't matter. Like, you have it. Either you have it or you don't have it. And trust her instincts. Okay, this is the shop. This was taken in the 1800s. I want to say let's see. It was built in 1837. It was originally on the corner of Broad and North Water Street, which is now the Peter Folger Museum where the NHA offices are. And it survived the Great Fire in 1846. It was subsequently moved to its current position at 2 South Beach Street. And if you have dinner at Orrin Moore on the balcony, you're sitting on that balcony right there, and my office is below. So I just think, and you can actually see the Candle House, the NHA in the background. So it's kind of fascinating. It was first operated as an antique shop in 1924 by Charles LaFontaine, then Robert White, and then my in-laws took it over from Robert White in 1980. So it's been an antique shop in that building for 100 years, which I think is pretty phenomenal. So last year was our 50th year in business, and I think this is my next slide, yeah. Kevin Paulson, who I've worked with for many, many years, and his son, Geddes, who's also an incredible artist, tattoo artist, fine artist, he can do anything. They came and painted a new mural for me in the front room of the shop. And they did all the walls in the shop. So if you have a chance, stop by and come and take a look at it. Where's my button? Okay, this is sort of funny. So this is me. This is in 2005. So at the time, I was living in Vermont with my husband. We had a ski company. But we had been buying and selling houses and fixing them up, and I just loved doing it. Had done a lot of buying with my mother-in-law over the years, and we'd always eyed this building and said, if we ever were going to have an antique shop, that's where we want it. So my twins were 6 months old, my older son was 2, and the owner of the antique shop said, hey, I'm moving to Bewkes, would you possibly have an interest in taking this over? And I said to my husband, is this crazy? And he said, well, yeah, but just see what happens. So then, 2 weeks later, I had the shop, and kind of the same thing. The rest was history. I had 5 clients. So This is kind of this. I ran the shop for 7 years before we moved here. At the time, my mother-in-law wanted to retire. Kind of sounds like Bess's story. And she said, "If you want the business, come and get it. Like it's time." So I said, "Let's just go. Like we'll help her wind it down or continue it and just see what happens." That was 12 years ago. You just never leave. Okay, and then we talked a little bit about this. We had said, let's talk about our favorite building on Nantucket. So I love this building. This is the Star of the Sea. I love it in part because it's sort of funny, but the name of my high school was Our Lady Star of the Sea High School back in Detroit. So that kind of originally drew me to it. But it's near my house, and I walk by it all the time. So I did a little research on it. There were originally 4 of these on the island. This is the last one remaining, and they would keep these long life-saving boats on the first floor, and they would roll them out on the ramp to go, if there was a ship in distress. So they actually helped, let's see here. In 1877, the W.F. Marshall sank, and the life-saving boats came out of this museum. In World War II, the Coast Guard lived here, and then more recently, in 1963, it opened up as a hostel. So even in 2010, you could stay here for $40 a night. So today, it's been purchased, and it's sitting there. And I'm curious to see what the next chapter of this building holds. Yeah. So I'll leave you with that because I think that's why we're here. It's to talk about preservation and the history of this amazing island.
That was great. Mine's going to be a little different. I'm a wash ashore. I'm the token wash ashore here. Okay, so my name is Ray Pohl. By the way, I'm going to save my slides for after my little CV review here, and then just sort of walk through the slides. My name is Ray Pohl, and I practice architecture here on Nantucket, among other things. I've never summered on Nantucket. In fact, the first time I even heard the word Nantucket was when I was in my teens, sitting around a campfire or a lunch table and heard a limerick about a man who was from here. Other than that, nothing to tell of about the faraway island. And then in the early 1980s, I was living in Providence, going to school there. A high school friend of mine had moved here and invited me out to visit. I took the slow boat out because it was the only option available at the time, and it was in the middle of February. And I spent the weekend mainly watching TV with him. There was literally nobody around, not a soul, and everything was gray, including all the houses. And so the weekend finished up, and everything was fine. And as I was on the boat leaving, I thought, how could anyone live on that desolate, flat, remote place? And then in 1991, I moved here. Now, I moved here, I think I wrote this down. I moved here with my wife, Lisa, and my then 1-year-old daughter, and had made a 1-year commitment with the architecture firm that I was working with in Cambridge that had a branch office here. And they said, oh, just go down there for the year. If you don't like it, come back and no harm done. I thought, well, that's not so difficult. So 3 years went by very quickly, and my wife and I decided to go out on our own as Botticelli and Pohl. She's the one with the nice name, by the way. And our second daughter, Phoebe, here present. She works for the NHA. Hello, Phoebe. So nice to see you. Phoebe was born. So I've been very happily producing architecture here almost exclusively for the last 33 years, and I'm starting to think that maybe this was all meant to be for me. So that's my intro. Now I'm going to show you a few of these slides. So this is my first image because those are my two daughters, and this series of photographs was taken right here, out in the yard of this building. And they're all great. Somebody in the audience said that I should do a redo of it like tomorrow, and I think that's a seriously good idea. Now, so this project is down on Easton Street, and of course, it's up for a number of reasons. When I did that first weekend tour to Nantucket, my initial impression of Nantucket was that everything was the same. Gray shingles, white trim, double hung windows, gable roofs. There was no variation. And now, after all these years that I've actually spent living and working here, I realize that there is an incredible amount of diversity within this rather confined environment, architectural environment. And this is a perfect example of it. So the reason that this photo came to my attention is because this is on Easton Street, and we are actually renovating this house. Now, we're not renovating the house that looked like that, because in the 70s, somebody had just done a total makeover of that house and added a garage in the front and did this and that, tore off all the porches. And the house that was there in the 70s and right up until about 3 years ago looked like sort of a 70s agglomeration. And so I found this so compelling that that's the house that it all started with. And so we're doing our best as a firm to bring the elements that we can back to that architecture. I was also really drawn by the fact that, here are these two girls standing in the front yard and reminded me of my two. So this, folks, is Codfish Park. And I include this for, again, a number of reasons. Codfish Park at this time represented to me the essence of architecture. And that is that it just sort of springs organically out of the ground and is really part of the landscape. And to see these houses sort of scattered along Codfish Park the way they are, these simple shapes, just seems so natural to me and so peaceful. Now, of course, we all know that Codfish Park has undergone numerous transformations, not least of which is that storms have taken most of what we see in this photograph away. And a lot of it's being rebuilt, and it's being rebuilt in a different fashion. But I think this is the way things used to be, simple, and one of my goals in my own practice is to get things back to simple. Can anybody guess where we are in this photograph? Okay, so one of the reasons that I'm sitting at this chair right now is that when Stacey said, would you like to speak? And I said, yeah, I'll give it some thought. And she said, what was it? Greater light. And I said, I'm in. Because greater light, if we all look around at this interior, which, by the way, used to be a barn. 100 years ago, it was a barn. And some Quaker sisters came in from Philadelphia, and they brought all these artifacts with them. They collected artifacts, and one was a painter, and one was a theater performer, thus this shape. And they sort of made this their own. They transformed it. And one of the things that I love about coming here is that once you're inside, and even in the garden, you just don't feel like you're here. And there are so many places on Nantucket where you just feel like you're someplace else. So I think Nantucket allows for so much diversity. And we're all sitting in a building that is a perfect example of that. this is my first commission. It's a house up on Lincoln Circle. By the way, Michelle, Sandy Holland does have impeccable taste. So my first commission, I've literally been working on this house for the last 30 years as the family has grown. Sandy did the original interior design, which was fabulous. And the woman sitting to my right has continued in that tradition, and it still looks fabulous, and it morphs with the growth of the family. I believe that's it. Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't need it. So now everybody's work is going to be on a loop, and you'll be able to see it as we talk. But never mind. I was going to say a little preachy thing, echoing Michelle about preservation and why we're all really thrilled to be in this house and the importance of the NHA in preserving the character of Nantucket. So continuing the tradition of artisanal artistry, it seamlessly bridges the divide between timeless craft and modern design. So how would you all say that you help ensure local craft traditions and knowledge are incorporated in what you do? And do you think, even though I know the answer, that the art of craftsmanship is something that should be an essential element in the best of Nantucket design? So anyone's welcome to chime in.
I'll start.
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, at the Looms, we take every opportunity to, tell the story of the craftsmanship and the artisans. Susan's work is such a beautiful example of that. Susan Boardman sitting over there. Susan has done such a wonderful job of doing the research behind each of her pieces, and then we get to tell that story. So I think in every project we do, there always is an element, whether it's our hand-woven throw or a local painting or a beautiful basket. It's just part of the formula to make sure that when you see one of our homes, you know it when you see it. You know it's a Looms home because of our color palettes, because of the art that's represented. So it's very important.
Good.
You're going to see shortly, Ray's like, what about that house you did, the one that was in veranda? You got to put that in. Like, do you have any before and afters? So you'll see them. That house very much, Ray did the architecture a long time ago, so the outside was unchanged, and that looks fantastic. But the inside was a spec house. And the goal was to bring some Nantucket character to it, and boy, I think we really did. And we did that by having Kevin Paulson come and paint the floors and do stencil on the walls. She collected a lot of Nantucket art. Karen Ward did a lot of the interior painting, and it really just came to life. Here it is. This is the house. Because of the craftsmanship that we brought in, you almost can't see. There's a before and after. Yeah. And you just, it needed a human touch. And that's, I think, that the pictures, say 1,000 words about what bringing the craft into the design can do.
Right.
I can follow that up with the baskets. That makes sense with light chip baskets, at least. I'm sure everybody here, I can see lots of light chip baskets in the audience, but I think there's like, so when my dad came out here, there were over 15 basket makers, and now there's, I think, 4 of us. So there's a there's a contrast between basket makers and basket weavers. I know a historic basket maker, Bill Severance, used to say this to his students, like, they would come to him, I've made 10 baskets. Like, yeah, I can come into your studio. And he's like, did you make the base? They're like, no. Did you make the handle? No. Honey, you're a basket weaver. So there's definitely, there's a lot of people who love light chip baskets, and that's so important to have people follow the craft. But it is equally as important to preserve making everything from scratch, doing the woodworking, doing the carving, doing the scrimshaw, using traditional materials. constructing it in a traditional way. So I think there's a tie between, the utilitarian use that it originated as and the modern, use that it is now, and not losing the traditional aspects
Yeah, I
of
think
it.
it's so great that you're learning all of the elements, or that you have learned all of the elements that go
Still a
into
student,
making
yeah.
an authentic basket, because these kind of crafts are being lost everywhere in the world. And here it's so important. I love that you're actually doing it. And Ray, I know you wanted to say something.
So I'm a member of, I've been a member for the last 10 years, I think, of an obscure organization out here called the Historic District Commission. And,
Anyone laughing is a Nantucket resident.
okay. So for those of you that don't know, the Historic District Commission has everything to say about the exterior of any architectural feature, whether it be a new house or changing the color of your front door.
Of which we should say there are restricted colors.
There are. There are. So for those of you never having gone through the process, it's rigorous at a minimum. Now, the interesting thing about the Historic District Commission is at any given time, given the makeup of the board, which are elected board members,
Yeah.
so it's kind of a popularity contest as opposed to a qualification contest. At any given time, certain priorities will rise up above other things that might otherwise have been a priority. I'm going to give you a rather flagrant example of this. Walter Beinecke, I'm sure you're all aware of who Walter Beinecke is.
Why don't you just briefly, because there are people who aren't from
Just
Nantucket.
briefly, Walter Beinecke is essentially responsible for making the entire island of Nantucket a historic landmark and subject to the HDC. Now, Bud Beinecke was a fabulous guy, and Bud Beinecke did not think that Victorian architecture had a place in Nantucket. So he didn't mind knocking down the Victorian houses, because what he was after were the old 5-bay Quaker style houses. Well, that has changed a lot, but it changes the exterior now. I'm only talking about the exterior of the buildings. The changes to the exterior of the buildings are a function of what any particular board considers to be historically appropriate or not. So when I ran, I realized as an architect, I had been presenting before them for 25 years before that, that certain things were still historically appropriate, but the board just wasn't allowing them. So to take an example, that window right there, if you were applying for that window 10 years ago, the answer would be categorically, absolutely not. Does that mean it's inappropriate for Nantucket? Not at all. So I would like to liberalize the Historic District Commission within reason, to the point where it will allow for the diversity that I had mentioned earlier on in my little presentation. And then in terms of the modern, we get to have our fun on the interior.
Right. But it's one of the reasons Nantucket looks the way it does. Anyone who's last year during Nantucket by Design, I remember some of the visitors, the speakers came here and were incredibly impressed with the work that this island has done in preservation, with it looking authentic and not hokey. Nantucket really feels authentic, which I think is huge. Anyway, we have so many questions we're never going to get to. But anyway, so one of the things I want to talk about is sense of place, because sense of place is so hugely important, and especially in a place like Nantucket. So how do you balance a particular, I guess this is more for the interior and architecture, but how do you balance a particular sense of place with a broader design sense? For example, how do you keep what may be essentially a beach house, albeit maybe a big one, from becoming a formal decorating power play?
There's a slide in here. It's a very kind of primitive shack, and that was Bill and Andy's home out in Matacasham.
Yep.
And that's what the Looms kind of inspired our cottage style. And it's primitive because it's very simple, just a beautiful artwork, but very minimal furnishings. And they really believe that the lifestyle of living by the beach should be fresh air, you know, a little sand on, you know, on the floors, a lot of fresh flowers, letting the salt air in, but still having collections that were really meaningful, with, again, the beautiful artwork, high quality furnishings, but things that were very, very kind of sentimental to them. And we've tried to translate that to the next generation and educate people that you don't need to have an overly done house to have a place of comfort. It should speak to you personally, and really reflect what's important to you, as well as a reflection of the island, which
Okay.
is the natural beauty is why we're all here, I think.
Right. What you're saying totally resonates with me, the idea of having sentimental pieces in your home. And like Ray said, we work with a lot of generational clients. I work with the children of the people that my mother-in-law worked with. And so we incorporate a lot of the parent, you know, the family pieces. And if anyone says that brown furniture is dead, that makes me crazy. That is not true. And I'm constantly amazed, even yesterday, the young people walking through our store because they're curious. I do think that there is a trend towards vintage, unique furniture, or you know, anything like vintage clothing, vintage. So there's an interest in it, and I think a lot of what makes these designs that I work on successful are the owners' collections. You know, Susan has a beautiful collection. You know, people that come in the shop and have collections of woolies, and that's what gives it this personality and a real sense of place to me.
And that is exactly one of my questions about generational ownership here and passing on things. What do you do about young clients who have inherited, you know, a parent's house and furnishings, who don't quite understand? Do you try and educate them?
I think a lot of times those people grew up with that furniture and they have that sensibility
Right.
and that affection towards them. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a way to. I think I do it by showing it. Like, I remember this one specific room. It didn't have anything antique in it, and it just looked flat. So we swapped out the table, and it was like, oh, it was like a relief. There it is. You need that human touch. And so I have the benefit of having this shop and a warehouse full of furniture, so we can try things, and that sort of gets the point across, if you will, where people can open up to, all right, I'll try it. You know, I'll try this antique. I'm not obligated to keep it, but oh my gosh, I never would have thought, you know, to have done that. So
Right. That's great. Yeah, Ray?
Hopefully this will answer the question about sense of place. So I think it's a lot easier to be a Buddhist when you're out in the moors or on the beach than in traffic on Old South Road. So with that in mind, an overarching principle for us in our firm is that a house, a place where you dwell, should create a sense of repose. Now, sense of repose has nothing to do with the style of the architecture or the decorating or whatever. A sense of repose is where you go someplace and your mind is clear. So listen, everyone comes to Nantucket with the goal, I'm pretty sure, except maybe some of the guys that come out for Fagawi, they come here for a sense of peace, togetherness, a place that's an oasis away from, you know, what a fellow board member used to call America.
right. That's what we call it.
So that the sense of repose can come out in a lot of different ways, and you know, I think successful interiors are ones that are well organized and give sort of a, you know, a quietness, exude quietness, and to me, that's consonant with what your phrase sense of place, you know, boy, think about Nantucket when it was uninhabited. By the way, my daughter and I were talking about this yesterday. Was everyone aware that before the settlers came to Nantucket, Nantucket was completely 100% treed?
Yeah.
Forests. That's all that was here. And then it all became grazeland. And now it's sort of somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think there are people who come to Nantucket who, because they think it's like a place to be,
Right.
who don't understand the culture or the mission of organizations like this. What do you do about those kind of people?
I was like,
Real answer?
Real answer.
We'll get back to you.
right.
We'll let you know.
Have you guys had clients like that?
Yeah, I mean, they're customers every day who don't kind of understand our history, but that's the opportunity.
To educate.
Yeah, and to sell them something.
There's always so much room for collaboration with baskets, you know, and we do repairs at our shop too, so that's part of the fun is seeing somebody's basket from 100 years ago that's broken. Then you get to get into the meat of like, how did they construct this, or oh, they do it differently or whatever. So working on preserving that, and but then, yes, when creating like a new basket, some of it's a collaboration. People will say, oh, well, can I add this or can I add this? And sometimes the answer is no, you
Right.
can't, because, you know, that's not traditional, or, you know, sorry, that's not what we do here. It's part of it is preservation of the, you know, of the traditional craft. So.
Right.
I mean,
Michelle?
I just think that what you said was the $1 million question, or $1 billion question. You know, it's
Yeah.
kind of at the tip of everybody's tongues, and we are at a tipping point. And it's why I get emotional,
Yep.
you know,
Well, I think that's why we're all invested in this.
very much so, yeah.
Right. Well, I will ask a lighter question now
Okay.
before we go to Q&A. Okay, so you mentioned collections. So some people come in to all of you with collections, and some people don't. And what would you say is the key to incorporating Nantucket-themed collections in the house, you know, baskets, sailors' valentines, whatever it might be, without seeming too contrived or expected? And if someone has a large collection, how do you present them in an unpretentious way so that they charm rather than show off?
I have a quick answer. Is I think I feel like based off of what you guys have said too, that and you as well, Bess, talking about that it's quality versus quantity.
Thank you.
You know, like that's kind of the number one, is having things that are unique and handmade, but of quality, and not necessarily the number of things you have. You know.
And that speak to you. I mean, they
Yeah.
have to have some you want a connection to things around you. My mom, there's a slide in there, it's of my mom's house, and she has a skeleton collection of miniature skeletons.
Oh, wow, I didn't.
And it's not Nantucket, but you
Yeah.
know, she's got other stuff around that represent the island, and it's just this, you know, whimsical kind of, you know, curiosities that there it is. I don't know if you can tell, it's on the bottom.
Oh my God, I love that.
And then there are the
that's
Doc
cool.
McGee baskets. I don't know if you remember Doc McGee. He was the FBI agent who was 6'9", and he would make the miniature baskets. His specialty was miniature baskets.
Right.
And he would engrave little sentiments to her, and so they're around the skeleton collection. So you can have both.
Oh, I completely agree, and that's one of the things about Nantucket, which some of us have discussed before, which is historically people brought things from around the world home to Nantucket. So
It all has a place here.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I also think that there's something to be said about using things functionally rather than just displaying them.
Right.
You know, put your flowers in the antique brass urn, or, but, you know, I think if you're actually using things as they're intended to be used, and then it's not contrived by definition.
Right.
Yeah.
And not too precious, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, if any of you have something to add, I will allow you to do that before we move on to Q&A.
Look how good we are.
I know, incredible, right? we have a clock now, and it says 14 seconds to Q&A. So anybody have anything to add before I open it up? No? Okay. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you, Stacey.
And we have a mic to be passed around if anyone has a question.
Oh dear.
Okay, Anne.
Thank you, Stacey. Thanks to everybody. Michelle, was it the design and then the antiques and then the design, or did it happen together for your in-laws when they moved here?
That's an interesting question. Because at Hudson's, they were very much both. So they started the antique shop, but they sent their designer out. And they really, at that time, there wasn't like design, interior design. I mean, the Looms and the Nantucket House are really the first people to venture into that space. Now there's, a million designers. So I think they kind of helped define that.
Yeah.
But they very much go hand in hand and still do,
Right.
honestly.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I always say the antique shop is like our billboard. You come in and you get a sense, and then the design follows from there a lot of times.
Because I was thinking when it all started, there couldn't have been that many projects.
Right.
Who were you
Right.
doing the design for, kind of thing? It must have been slow on the design side.
Slow
when the
build.
antique started.
Yeah, but it was like you said, truly, it was Bunny Mellon and Jackie O, and it was these taste makers who sort of discovered this place, and they were
And
they were
appreciated the
clients.
craft.
Yeah.
The craft,
Yeah.
amazing panel. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anne.
I was just going to add that my mom started doing interior design at the store because everyone kept buying furniture, and then they'd say, I don't know where to put it. So she'd go into their homes, and she'd reconfigure the living room. And then, we were like, that's called interior design. And that's how it grew, right? So
Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm really enjoying everyone's perspective on this beautiful island. I happen to live on the other island, and it's really an interesting contrast, so to speak. But I'm curious to the size of homes here. I'm not that familiar. I'm working on a project that's 3,000 square feet in Chilmark, and I'm working on, and that's the limit now. In Edgartown, I'm working on a 26,000 square foot home. And I'm curious, how does Nantucket manage the size of homes, and what do you see moving forward?
I think
Ray
that's a
question.
question for Ray. Yeah.
Other island, I thought you meant Tuckernuck. Martha's where?
Yeah.
No, so Nantucket is definitely going through growing pains. And there's a funny story. My dad was playing golf with this guy down in Florida. And he said, and what's your son do? Oh, he's an architect up on Nantucket. And the guy said, what does he do? And my dad said, he builds houses. There's no land left. I was the Pepsi distributor there in the 1960s, and there was no land left to be had. So what does he do? And it's remarkable, and it's, to a certain extent, unfortunate that land out here keeps getting subdivided. Mm-hmm. People are finding new ways to subdivide parcels, and as the numbers for real estate go up, which they obviously have been doing, the incentive to subdivide parcels that otherwise people would not even consider subdividing is now an incredible incentive. So, we have zoning, and the Historic District Commission does have things to say about the size and scale of a building, but it's a problem. And Michelle and I were talking a little bit earlier about self-correction. I would say the average square footage of the houses that I was doing 10 years ago were bigger than the ones that I'm doing now. I think that people are somehow getting more mature and aware of how much space somebody actually really needs to dwell. And, I live in not a large house. I'm going to say it's maybe 2,500 square feet. We use the living room and the dining room twice a year. Christmas and Thanksgiving. That's it. and we walk through these spaces. Now, human beings are funny, it's this cliche about the kitchen, everybody always congregates in the kitchen. So really the amount of space that people need for bedrooms and that sort of thing, people are actually more comfortable in smaller spaces. And sometimes that's something that I can educate someone to, like, I know that your bedroom in Greenwich is 30 feet by 30 feet, but that's kind of not a good standard to bring, inherit or bring up to Nantucket. So ideally, I'd like to see the trend in size going down.
Chilmark, they have some pretty strict regulations
Yes, now
now.
they do. There
There's the
was
movie,
One
The One Big Home, yeah,
Yes.
which is
Fascinating.
fascinating.
And that really changed how things happen in Chilmark.
Yeah.
Obviously not in Eggertown. And what I find, as someone mentioned, you're there for the beauty of this island. Get outside. Get outside of your salon and your massage studios. So it's kind of a interesting push and pull, at least on, you've got 5 towns where I live,
Right.
so.
So I don't know how you agree on anything. Because
Pardon me?
I don't know how Martha's Vineyard agrees on anything. Because we have one town and we can't on things. And they've got 5 and they all need to, it's.
Yeah, well, and hence you end up with Chilmark now being limited.
Right.
But Edgartown, clearly, the dollar speaks. So,
Well, we have a little bit of that problem too.
yeah. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, right there, Jane.
Thank you all so much. It was really fascinating, great history from all of you. Thank you. My question is for Ray. I'm so curious about the structure that you showed us with the 2 young women and the wraparound porches. So you were mentioning about how strict the standards were with the HDC, but that there's a little bit of room now. So I'm curious, are you able, if you have historic reference of a structure looking like that 200 years ago or 150 years ago, are you able to now include some of the features that perhaps, specifically what features are able to be added, and what have you seen change with the HDC in your time there?
Thankfully, the answer is yes. And it really boils down to, so that photograph that I showed was part of our presentation to the HDC for what we wanted to accomplish with that building. So the HDC has younger members on. There's more architects on the board now than there used to be. In fact, there was a long period of time where there were no architects or designers on the board, which was a little troubling. But so if somebody shows us a precedent for, say, a window like that is a beautiful precedent, we'll embrace it. I think that the HDC historically has been afraid to make any kind of moves because there's this idea of setting precedent. Those people got to have that kind of window, why can't I? And now, well, forever, the HDC has taken each project on a case-by-case basis. So it depends on context, really, and whether it's a well-done version of that or a Home Depot version of that. So, but the board in general, I think, is becoming more open and responsive to historically appropriate features that would not have been approved 10 or 15 years ago. Yeah.
But does that mean a lot of things have been landmarked?
Oh, there's a lot of things that have been landmarked. Yeah. Now those have all kinds of restrictions placed on them. So that's kind of beyond us. If there's restrictions, we can't do anything to it. And rightly so.
But does that mean that it's fair to be copied if it's landmarked? It's fair game?
Well, not exactly. It's up to the discretion of the board. Because frankly, not everything that was done 100 years ago was great. Just because it's 100 years old doesn't mean it's fabulous. There's a lot of, mistakes were made.
Okay, we have time for one more question if anyone has one. Oh, Maureen?
Can you talk about trends in crafts on island? Baskets have kind of now brought us bracelets. Murals and wallpaper are back, thank God. What are you seeing? What do you
Painted
think
floors.
is Karen Ward, thank you, we love her. What are you seeing coming along in the next 5 or 10 years?
I can. Do you want to go? Yeah. I'm mic'd already.
Got a mic.
Yeah. So in terms of baskets, I think part of my dad's whole spiel with his students is when somebody's like, well, I want to make a really traditional basket, but the tradition was always to experiment. That is the history of baskets. There's these certain forms and certain components that are always the same, but it was a tradition to experiment and play around with design. And then as you move into 80s, 90s, it was all about how expensive can my basket be? How much ivory can be covering my basket? How, fine can the weaving be? How, it's bigger, better. And I think now there's definitely a trend towards, like Michelle mentioned, utilitarian baskets. So instead of all these pieces that would be displayed on the wall, people are like, how can I use this in my home? Can I wear it out to dinner? Is it practical? Is it going to carry the stuff? My phone, of course, is always the question. Will my phone fit in this? But I think the trend is towards things that you can use, things that are equally as beautiful and handmade and one of a kind, but also, can be used and enjoyed,
I'll just add that this year we've had probably our strongest sales in artwork, in locally produced artwork, which is really encouraging.
that's great.
Yeah, which is great to see, and a lot of sales from on the website of the artwork. So people from all over the country are buying. So I just encourage the next generation to keep up with that.
And are you talking about painting and photography? Both?
Little of everything.
Little of everything.
Yeah,
okay.
carvings. Yep.
Carving. Okay, all sorts of artwork.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Michelle?
things go. My mother-in-law used to say this, things kind of go in waves, right? Woolies have been a thing for the last few years.
What have?
Woolies.
Oh, woolies.
The
Well, I'm
hand-stitched.
obsessed.
Yeah. They're wonderful and hand
Yeah.
done, and they're all everyone's unique. Anne and I were talking about this yesterday. I feel like people are starting to look at copper and brass again. They make great containers, and that was something that would sit at the shop for a while.
Right.
But I'm seeing people kind of interested in that.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming, and I
Thank
want
you,
to
Stacey.
before.
Yeah.
And I want to remind everyone that starting at 1 o'clock, there is a book fair in the tented area in the garden at the Hadwin House, and that the next talk is it at 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock will be here also. So thank you, and enjoy your week of design.
Thank you. Thanks, Stacey.